Ee,
Buyurun başlayabiliriz hocam.
Peki başlayabiliriz Emre Hocam. Teşekkür ederim. Sayın Rektör Yardımcım, Sayın Dekanım, tüm Türkiye'den ve Avrupa'dan bizleri izleyen değerli hocalarımız ve araştırmacılar, Gazi Üniversitesi Gazi Eğitim Fakültesi tarafından düzenlenen 95. yıl etkinliğimize hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Bugün eğitim bilimleri öğretmen yetiştirme alanında Q1 sınıfındaki dergilerden olan European Journal of Teacher Education dergisinin editörü Profesör Doktor Maria Assunção Flores ile Uluslararası Öğretmen Eğitimi dergilerinde yayın yapma konusunu konuşacağız. Öncelikle açılış konuşmalarını yapmak üzere Sayın Rektör Yardımcımız Profesör Doktor Bekir Buluç hocamıza sözü arz ederim.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum Nazlı Hocam. Kıymetli dekanım, değerli akademisyenlerimiz ve bugünkü çok değerli konuğumuz Sayın Profesör Doktor Maria Flores, değerli katılımcılarımız. Sözlerime başlamadan önce hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum. Rektör Bey'in de özellikle selamlarını, hürmetlerini iletmek istiyorum. Kendisi katılacaktı bu toplantıya. Fakat son anda çıkan bir programdan dolayı katılamadı. Hepinize Rektör Bey'in selamlarını da özellikle iletmek istiyorum. Bugünkü konumuz Q1 dergilerde yayınların yapılmasıyla ilgili. Malumunuz üzere üniversitemiz bir araştırma üniversitesi. Araştırma üniversitesi konumundaki üniversitemiz, uluslararası standartları sadece eğitim öğretim faaliyetlerinde değil, aynı zamanda yayın konusunda da takip etmeyi ilke edinmiştir. Bu bağlamda yapılan yayınların niteliğinin artırılması, uluslararası boyutta üniversitemizin marka değerini daha öteye taşıyacak önemli bir etken olarak görülmekte. Web of Science'da taranan birinci çeyreklikteki dergilerde yayın yapmak artık bölümlerimiz için olduğu kadar eğitim bilimleri ve öğretmen yetiştirme alanında da verdiğimiz emek, harcanan zaman ve konuların derinliği açısından hepimiz için oldukça büyük önem arz etmekte. Bugünkü etkinlikte Web of Science birinci çeyreklikte taranan bir öğretmen eğitimi dergisinin editörünü ağırlıyoruz. Özellikle Q1 ve Q2 bandındaki dergilerde yapılan yayınlar bu bağlamda hepimiz için oldukça büyük önem arz etmekte. Bu bakımdan gerek akademik kariyerinin başındaki araştırmacılar için, gerekse akademisyenlerimiz için bu dergilerde yayın yapma süreçlerine ilişkin bilgi paylaşımlarının son derece önemli olduğunu düşünüyoruz. Bu nedenle bugünkü konferansımızda tecrübelerini, deneyimlerini bizlerle paylaşacak olan çok değerli Profesör Doktor Maria Flores'e en içten duygularımla teşekkürlerimi özellikle sunmak istiyorum. Thank you very much, Maria.
Teşekkür ederiz hocam.
Thank you very much.
Konuşmanızdan dolayı. Biz de üniversitemize katkılarından dolayı ve bize vermiş olduğu destekten dolayı çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Şimdi etkinliğimize dair kısa bir bilgi vermek istiyorum. Buradan itibaren sunumumuza İngilizce devam edeceğiz. First of all, I would like to give brief information about the history of Gazi Faculty of Education. Gazi Faculty of Education was founded in 1926 by Gazi Mustafa Kemal Atatürk with the name of Middle School Teacher Training and Education Institute. In 1976, it was named as Gazi Institute of Education, providing education with a duration of 4 years. In 1982, it started to function as Gazi Faculty of Education. And this year, we are celebrating the 95th anniversary of the foundation of Gazi University. And today's agenda is to share emerging research trends in teacher education and publishing process in highly prestigious journals. During the session, you may write your questions and comments on the chat box. At the end of the presentation, I will pose them in the question and answer part. And now, I would like to introduce today's presenter. Maria Assunção Flores works at the University of Minho, Portugal. She received her PhD at the University of Nottingham, United Kingdom. She was a visiting scholar at the University of Cambridge and the University of Glasgow. She has published extensively in international and national journals, books, and book chapters. Her research interests include teacher education and professional development, teacher evaluation, curriculum assessment, teacher identity, and higher education. She was the chair of the International Study Association on Teachers and Teaching between 2013 and 2019, and chair of the Board of Directors of the International Council on Education for Teaching between 2011 and 2015. She is currently the chair of the SIG research on the teacher induction of the American Educational Research Association and president of the board of International Collaborative Action Research Network for the Portuguese-speaking countries. Now, she is the co-editor of European Journal of Teacher Education and executive editor in the journal Teachers and Teaching, Theory and Practice. In 2019, she received International Council on Education for Teaching Research Award for recognition of rigorous investigations contributing to the worldwide knowledge base for teacher education. And now, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Flores to the virtual stage.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to greet you all, the Vice Rector and all the participants. I would like to thank the organizers and also to congratulate the celebration that you are doing this year. So congratulations, and I wish you well. I would like to share some ideas, some thoughts, some suggestions maybe about how to publish in international journals, drawing upon my experience as an author, as a reviewer, as an editor. I think I will present some slides with some ideas, but then I think it will be important to have a more interactive part in which we can maybe respond to some specific questions. Again, thank you very much for your invitation. And now I will try to share my screen. Let me see if it works. Let me know if it is working.
Yes, now we can see your screen.
Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, I will say that writing for a publication in international journals, of course, in English, and I will say a few words about my personal account, my personal experience, like I said, some tips about academic writing, which is also always important to remind. And then writing for academic journals, not only the process of submission and review and the revision and also the decision-making process, but also what are the key questions that any kind of paper needs to address. And finally, some tips for publication. We can discuss the trends in teacher education currently. Of course, one of the key topics relates to COVID-19 pandemic and its effects on teacher education and on learning to teach, not only in terms of the effects, but in terms of the processes, and also in terms of the what it means to be a teacher educator and a student teacher, or a teacher to be in such complex scenario. We are talking about new contexts for teaching, new contexts for learning, so new conditions for practicum. So what are the implications in terms of professional learning, the consolidation of professional knowledge, and also about, of course, issues of identity, professional identity in such scenarios. One of the key aspects relates, of course, to technology, but as I will explain later, the European Journal of Teacher Education does not focus on technology, but on teacher education. So of course we can link the two topics, but it's important to pay attention to the scope of the journal. So this is a brief introduction. And now I would like to say that academic writing, or from a non-native English speaker, it's important to say that yes, it is possible. We can, of course, publish, and I guess that many of our participants in this workshop or in this webinar had already the possibility of publishing internationally, and many of them know the process. So what it entails to submit a paper for international journals. I did my PhD in English in England in 2002, so I have dealt with issues of language, of culture, and of how to do research. And actually, in my room, I had a very large group of colleagues from Turkey, and I would like to remind this important day. So I have. It was a very good, a very large and a very enthusiastic group of PhD students. Also, I would like to say that, especially for PhD candidates, it's important to submit, of course, the research that the PhD students do. And I would like to share my own experience. I published my first paper while I was doing my PhD, and the first paper appeared in Journal of Education for Teaching in 2001. So I will share some ideas about my learning experience as an author, reviewer, and editor. Of course, when papers are rejected, this is not a good news. But it is always a learning experience, and I think we need to bear in mind this idea. So first of all, when we think about publication in international journals, especially in high impact factor journals, it is important to focus on this list of criteria or ideas that we need to pay attention to. First of all, the soundness of the argument. What kind of ideas we want to convey, and how robust is our argument. In other words, what do we have to say, and why it is important and relevant. Of course, it is important to have a robust framework, a conceptual framework and methodology, a robust or solid methodology. Also, it is important to bear in mind that we need to pay attention to English as a language for publication. And of course, it relates to issues of style and characteristics of written English, academic English, which is different, and it's important to emphasize this idea. The other one, it's importance of thinking in English, and this especially for non-English native speakers is important, because some papers sometimes they are very interesting, but the English is not so good, or maybe it's the ways the argument is elaborated or developed. So this is something important. And of course, issues of objectivity, clarity of argumentation, and the structure. And structure and content are very important in a paper, especially when we aim at 6,000, 7,000, or 8,000 words. We cannot say everything, so we need to do a very good and a very relevant selection of the key information. So what are the key questions that we need to address when we aim at writing for publication in high impact factor journals? It is important to choose the right journal, because sometimes the journal that we select is not the right one. Again, the European Journal of Teacher Education focuses on teacher education from a broader perspective, from an inclusive perspective, but it's about teacher education. It's not about teaching, it's not about technology, it's not about psychology. So it's important to choose the right journal, to be strategic in terms of the scope of the journal. Are we aiming at a very broad focus or a very specific one? What about timing for publication? What about the reputation of the journal? And this is important because when we pay attention to the reputation of the journal, of course, high impact factor journals receive many submissions. For instance, in the European Journal of Teacher Education, we received more than 500 papers per year. So it is important to bear in mind that it's important to think about timing of publication and about, not only the scope of the journal, but the reputation of the journal. And sometimes it implies waiting for a longer period in terms of the review process and in terms of publication process. Do not give up if your paper is rejected. It's a learning experience. This is something important that I would like to emphasize, because some people might think that other authors are not rejected, but they are. Everybody is. So this is important. And read the instructions for authors very carefully. And of course, one important recommendation is have a look at previous articles published in the journal. So it's not a good sign when you submit a paper and you do not relate your paper to the previous papers published in the journal, which means that you do not engage in discussions about the topic, which is, of course, the object of discussion in previous articles published in the paper. So it's important to do this kind of link or connection, or at least discussion in regard to previous articles published in the journal. One key another recommendation that I would like to emphasize is to read a lot, to have a look at the structure, content, style, and methodology. Have a look at the aims and scope of the journal, like I said, very important. Look at who the editors and editorial board are. I think it's important that you know somebody. It means that you know the field. This is an important sign, I would say. Have a look at who has published in the journal. Ask for feedback from a critical friend before submitting your paper. This is also a very important recommendation. And of course, ask a native speaker to edit your final paper before submitting it. And of course, the journal guidelines. One important issue is that the paper is not a thesis, so we need to select the right information to include in your paper. So some tips, and I would like to share with you. What is the purpose or the message you want to convey? So what do you have a clear argument or message? If the answer is yes, go ahead. If the argument is not clear, if the message is not clear, maybe you need to rethink and improve the paper. The other question is it important and relevant? Why? Why is your paper important? Not only to the national context, but also to the international readership. Because sometimes in the journal, we receive, like I said, good papers, but they are aiming more to national contexts. So sometimes they are very good papers, but for the countries in which they are focusing on, and not for the international readership. So you need to have this international perspective. So the question is, why is my paper relevant to the international readership? Does your paper have an international perspective? Is it of interest to an international audience? Yes or no? So this is something that it's important. Sometimes we think it's important, but we need to demonstrate, we need to clearly demonstrate the relevance of the paper from an international perspective. Do you have a clear and solid theoretical framework? Do you mention the classics in the given topic, but is your paper also updated in terms of existing recent research literature? So it needs to have a balance. So it's not a good sign when a paper has very outdated references. So this is something that needs to be emphasized in this kind of questions regarding the papers to be submitted to international journals. The other question is the methodological framework sound? Sometimes it's not sound enough, so we can anticipate problems or criticisms. So we need to make sure that when we submit a paper, the conceptual and methodological framework is sound. How does, another important question, and sometimes papers, authors do not acknowledge this. How does it add to existing literature in the field? What is the contribution of the paper of your study to the international literature? So we cannot say, for instance, that this paper is important to the Portuguese context because of etc., etc. Or this paper is important for the Turkish context because etc., etc. We need to make sure that it's important internationally because we are talking about international publications. And this is something important to emphasize. What about implications of the findings is something that also needs to be addressed. And what are the limitations of your study? This is something important that also sometimes it's not always included in the papers. And what about issues for further research in the field? Something that also needs to be addressed. So to sum up, choose a clear focus, make your argument clear, don't forget to include an international perspective, pick the right journal, follow the journal guidelines, write a cover letter, state clearly the contribution of your paper, respond to reviewers' comments and suggestions, and importantly, don't give up. So now I would like to talk about the European Journal of Teacher Education, which is a very important journal. In the journals within the scope of education and educational research, and I will talk about that later. As you know, the European Journal of Teacher Education is a journal of the Association for Teacher Education in Europe, ATEE, and I would like to invite you all to visit the website of the association to find more about the association, about how to become a member, and also to learn more about the European Journal of Teacher Education. It's a highly recognized journal in the field of teacher education, one of the most read journals. It was launched in 1978, so it has a very broad, a very large number of papers already published, and it is important maybe to have a look at the review that was done by Kay Livingston and myself when we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the journal. So in terms of the topics that were more addressed in the journal over the last 40 years, and we also address some aspects, some elements, some topics that in need of further research. So have a look at this paper. It's the editorial of the issue 5 published in 2017. It's a very popular journal. It publishes 5 issues per year. And it includes from time to time special issues on different relevant topics. And it is in the SCCI, the social sciences citation index. So which, as you know, it's a very relevant index. In terms of the editorial board, I don't have time to explore, but this at the moment, Anya Swennen from Amsterdam and myself, we are the editors of the journal. And I would like to stress the scope. So to give an example of what I have said previously. So the European Journal of Teacher Education provides an opportunity for dissemination of educational research, which investigates theory, policy and practice in teacher education at pre-service and in service levels, predominantly in the countries of Europe, but also beyond Europe. If you have a look at the journal, we received publications from all over the world. I would say in the last year, maybe, let me see, around 70 countries. So actually, really from all over the world. Its audience includes all those who make a professional concern, who have a professional concern or interest in the education of teachers, or for all age groups. So it's about teacher education, broadly speaking, but the focus is teacher education. So if your paper does not fall into the scope of the journal, so it does not relate directly or indirectly to teacher education, maybe it's important to find another journal. So this is important about the scope of the journal. So the European Journal of Teacher Education is an international journal. So it has high standards, and the criteria is stricter and stricter. I mean, because we receive more and more submissions, and because the impact factor of the journal is higher and higher. So in terms of the contributions, all of them are submitted for blind review by at least 2 peers, additionally to review by the editorial board. So as you can see, the editors do not make a decision unless they have at least 2 reviews from 2 independent reviewers. In terms of the decisions, some papers, I would say most papers, are desk reject. So sometimes they do not fall into the scope of the journal. Those who are sent out for review, sometimes they are accepted as it stands. They can be evaluated as minor revisions, major revisions, reject and resubmit, or reject. So reject and resubmit means that there are serious concerns, serious criticisms addressed in relation to a given paper. So, but the editor thinks that there is potential. So the decision is reject or resubmit. And the case of, in the case of reject means that the criticisms are major, and so it would mean that the reviewers have both of them a negative perspective in relation to a given paper. So in terms of the journal metrics, as you can see, in 2019 impact factor is 2.250. We have to wait for the 2020 impact factor. I think it will be released soon. The European Journal of Teacher Education is the key KU1, so the best quartile. The 5-year impact factor is 2.3, and the site score for 2019 is 3.6, and to 2020 is, I think, 4.3. So there was an increase in terms of the site score. In terms of speed and acceptance, 23 days on average from submission to first decision. 148 days average from submission to first post review decision, 10 days average from acceptance to online publication, and overall 16% of acceptance rate. And of course, you can find more information in the website of the journal. I think this is some ideas that I would like to share with you. And now maybe we can also interact a little bit, and I would like to maybe to invite our organizer to say a few words in relation to her experience in terms of being an editorial board member of the journal and also a reviewer. Is it possible?
Thank you very much, dear Dr. Flores, for your presentation. And yes, I agree with the comments and criticism you shared with us. Well, I can say that it's difficult to generalize the problems here because each study is, I think, special and a different world to us. Also, publishing process is a non-linear and complex process. But in the broadest sense, I can say that the problems in manuscripts we have been reviewing are mostly related to the lack of clarity of the author's message. I mean, the aims, for example, sometimes are not parallel to the main idea of the study, and sometimes relating the topic to a strong theoretical foundation becomes a complex process. Also, the relevance of the manuscript to the international audience of the journal is also important, as you suggested. So, from this perspective, we can say that there is a clear understanding of the journal scope and its international audience. Yeah, so that we can make our findings and implications internationally relevant. And
thank you. I don't know if you have some questions. Maybe we can discuss some of them.
Actually, yes. I have a list of questions from the audience so far, and now I will pose them to you.
Okay.
First of all, although you emphasized the trendy topics recently in teacher education journals, still I want to pose this question. What are the research trends in teacher education journals nowadays?
Yes, thank you for the question. Apart from the hot topic at the moment, and if you look at the various journals, there are different calls for special issues focusing on COVID-19 and teacher education. So not only in terms of the processes and the structure, the content of the programs, but also the effects and the implications. So this is something that maybe will have, implications or long-term effect in terms of a key topic in teacher education, because there is a lot, I think, for instance, about innovation features in teacher education, in terms of the digitally mediated teacher education, environments, online teaching, and maybe to relate, like I said before, to new contexts for learning, for teaching, and for learning to teach. And so what does it imply in terms of how to become a teacher? So not only about issues of identity, but maybe issues related to the focus, the rationale, the principles, the framework of teacher education in such challenging, complex, uncertain times.
Yeah, and in unprecedented times, maybe.
Yes, so it's technology, it's about COVID-19, but it's also about issues of, like I said, of innovation. And another trend, maybe another topic that deserves further consideration is identity, the identity formation of student teachers, because identity is a very well-developed field, but the identity development during initial teacher education. So in other words, how does initial teacher education impact or influence or make a difference in the formation of the teacher, the identity of the student teachers.
Yeah, okay, that was clear. Thank you very much. And they also want to learn if qualitative studies are more likely to be accepted in your journal. Do you also welcome quantitative studies?
Sorry?
Do you also welcome quantitative studies? Do you have such a preference?
I think if you ever look at the journal, we welcome different kinds of papers. So quantitative, qualitative, mixed method, position papers, as long as they are strong, they are robust in terms of the methodological framework, but also in terms of the conceptual framework. And I think one key issue to bear in mind relates to the contribution to the field. Sometimes the study might be quantitative and very strong, very well developed, but the question is, how does it add to existing literature? So I would say, in general, all kinds of research methods are accepted, but of course they need to have strong, they need to be solid and to make a significant contribution to the field.
Okay, thank you. And here is another question. From the editor's perspective, what are the common problems in the manuscripts submitted to your journal? Although you answered this, yeah, I may skip this question if you want. And novice researchers would like to learn about your suggestions for themselves. What would you like to suggest for novice researchers?
Yes, first of all, the problems with the paper sometimes relate to the fact that the papers do not fall into the scope of the journal. The other one is that they lack an international perspective. And some other problems relate to the lack of a solid conceptual and methodological framework. So this is something important to bear in mind. In terms of the recommendations for young scholars or PhD candidates, I would suggest, first of all, to read a lot. Read a lot about, previous papers published in the journal, especially if they relate directly or indirectly to the topic that you are working on. Because this is important for you to become familiar with the discussion, familiar with the topic, and to be able to justify or to say why is your study relevant in terms of the international literature. Why is it relevant? Why do you think it adds to existing literature?
Mm-hmm.
And another question that I would like to add relates to the sometimes, like I said, and I would like to emphasize it again because I think it's important, is that papers sometimes, the authors sometimes manage to justify the relevance of their study from a national perspective. But if you aim to publish in international journals, you need to be prepared to justify why and to clearly demonstrate the relevance of your study from an international perspective. So you need to know, you need to be familiar with the discussions, with what is known and not known in the international research literature. And sometimes you look at the references of a given paper and you find out that basically the vast majority are national references, not international references. And so it's important to bear in mind this. And this is a problem, I would say. And this for younger scholars or for potential contributors or academics wanting to publish internationally, especially in high impact factors, is the need to clearly demonstrate the knowledge of the field from this international perspective.
Yeah. And that was another problem that we have been experiencing while reviewing. So thank you again for this. Another question, which is similar to a previous question, but still, what do you think about the future research priorities in teacher education after, especially the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think one issue that deserves further consideration is, like I said before, the implications of COVID-19. I would say not only in teacher education, but in teaching in general. So what kind of changes are going to be, how can I say, developed? Or in other words, are there any changes, or is teacher education challenged in any way in terms of in the context post-COVID-19 pandemic? So are we going to come back to the previous practices as we were used to before COVID-19? So what about the implications in terms of the processes of teaching, of learning to teach, of organizing teacher education? Are there, and especially, for instance, in terms of the articulation between coursework and fieldwork? Are we thinking about the process of learning to teach in a different way? What about the practices of teacher educators? Because all of us, we moved to online teaching, online schools, but also universities and practicum and so on. So when we are going back to the new normal or the next normal, whatever we can call it, what would be the challenge or the change? Are we going to do things differently? What would be different, and so on? And I also find that one important feature relates to the personal or interpersonal dimension, or to the emotional dimension in teaching and in teacher education, because we moved to online environments, and of course online environments have specific characteristics, of course, but there are issues that deserve further consideration in terms of what we know about teaching, the teaching process as a complex activity with a lots of different kinds of dimensions. So what would be the implications in terms of the processes of teaching, of learning, and of learning to teach?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions right now, you may also share on the chat box. Yeah, that was all. That was the list of all questions I would like to pose. So, okay, then thank you very much, dear Dr. Flores, for this fruitful session. We would like to thank you very much for accepting to be here today with us. Also, I would like to thank all of the participants in today's session. I hope you find the session useful and insightful. While closing my speech, I would like to also thank the administration of Gazi Faculty of Education and the Dean, Professor Dr. Mahmoud Selvi, for their supporting the organization. We wish all the scholars, novice researchers, and experienced researchers success in their publishing trials, yes, and efforts. Hocam, would you like to add comments?
Nazlı Hocam, teşekkür ediyorum. Çok sağ olun. Profesör Doktor Maria Assunção Flores hocamıza canı gönülden teşekkür ediyoruz. Bu bir European Journal of Teacher Education dergisi ile ilgili bize vermiş olduğu değerli bilgiler için. Aynı zamanda katılımcı hocalarımız için umarım faydalı olmuştur. Katılımcılarımız için bir yol çizmişizdir. bıkmadan, usanmadan bu tip dergilerde Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 dergilerde yayın yapmaya gayret edeceğiz. Fakültemiz olarak, üniversite olarak ve ülke olarak buna dikkat etmemiz gerekiyor, yapmamız gerekiyor, başarmamız gerekiyor. Bu konuda tecrübelerini bize aktardığı için tekrar Maria hanımefendiye çok teşekkür ederiz.
Teşekkürler hocam. And Maria, would you like to add a final remark? What would you like to say?
Yes, I would like to thank you for the invitation again. I would like to say congratulations again on your celebration, on your anniversary. And also I would like to say that please go ahead and continue to work on publishing on papers to be published in international journals. And I hope that some of the tips and some of the questions that I addressed are useful for us to think about future publications. So again, congratulations and thank you.
Thank you very much, dear
Thank
Dr.
you very
Flores.
much, Maria.
Yes, thank you.
Nazlı Hocam, programımızı kapatabiliriz.
Çok teşekkür ederiz. Çok teşekkürler. Kapatabiliriz.